Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Dr. Rukhsana Chaudhry, and I'm the Director of Mental Health Programming for the American Muslim Health Professionals. I'm so pleased to have you here and to join us. Ramadan Mubarak to everyone that's listening and joining. I have a really great group of people that are going to be talking to you today about mental health first aid and its impact on our community and our desire and hopes to grow this program. I'm going to give a little bit of background about it, and then I will be able to introduce each of our speakers one by one. So mental health first aid is a mental health literacy movement and curriculum that we've adopted from the National Behavioral Council on Health. And essentially, we go out into communities taking that curriculum and bringing people their tools and language in mental health that will essentially help others who are facing crises or looking to deal with or cope with mental health struggles. So one by one, anybody that gets trained in mental health first aid helps their community member, their fellow same age peer, or family member to sort of become familiar with maybe what they're experiencing and how to then go out and seek help. So the idea is ultimately in our community, the Muslim community, we want people to become literate, but also essentially become aware of what's happening in our community and sort of around us so that we can change it from the inside, hopefully reduce stigma, inshallah, and help people get to a place where they can address their internal struggles that maybe they didn't feel they could bring out beforehand. So we're really excited about this program. I also want to take a moment to thank our donors and sponsors for this. We have a really important group that's decided to help us. That's Helping Hands USA, Amana Mutual Funds Trust, Saturna Capital, Nexus Pharmaceuticals, and Devon Bank. So we really appreciate anybody that kind of believes in the work we do, especially when it comes to mental health, and keeps us moving forward, inshallah. So I'm going to introduce our speakers one by one, and I would like you to just listen to a bit from them after I introduce them about a story that they've kind of taken with them maybe in the past year or in the last few years about somebody that's they've worked with or seen on their campuses that they feel has struggled with their mental health and maybe different aspects of how they were impacted and really if there was some connection to them, what that was. So I am first going to welcome Imam Khalid Latif. I'm so glad to have you here, Imam Khalid, and everyone is so eager to hear from you. Imam Khalid Latif is the Executive Director and Chaplain for the Islamic Center at the New York University. At NYU, Imam Khalid initiated his vision for a pluralistic American Muslim community rooted on campus and reaching out to the city. He is a highly sought after speaker and offers a unique blend of motivational speaking and spiritual development. We're so happy to have you here. Thank you, Imam Khalid.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I just kind of gave us an introduction, but I'd love it if you could share a story of someone that you have personally come in contact with, whether it's in your campus or through your own personal work as chaplain and imam, and just kind of being able to hear how that impacted that person and you afterward. I'm wondering if Imam Khalid is frozen. Perhaps. Okay. So I want to make sure that's what everyone else is seeing. What I'll do is I'll move to Dr. Shareef. So we'll come back to Imam Khalid. So Omar Shareef, we're so happy to have you here. You're such a critical part to our MHFA program. Dr. Omar Shareef has an MD, MBA, combined degree graduate from St. George's University School of Medicine and is currently a psychiatry resident physician at Nassau University's Medical Center. He is a certified adult mental health first aid instructor and is passionate about promoting mental health wellness in the Muslim community. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Shareef.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Rukhsana. So I really want to thank AMHP for pushing this initiative. I've been teaching mental health first aid courses since 2016. It's my 5th year instructing, and I could not have been happier when AMHP reached out to me and said, "You're doing a lot of great work here in New York, but this is something that really needs to be national. And alhamdulillah, this year actually, AMHP took a further step, and we're actually bringing this program to an international audience. So it really highlights how essential this need is for mental health awareness, mental health literacy, and mental health advocacy. And I'm truly proud to be part of the AMHP team in bringing this to the forefront. You know, a lot of folks don't really know much about mental health first aid, but until they actually take the course and then get the basics on, you know, our curriculum of learning about depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, panic attacks, substance use, addiction, psychosis, schizophrenia, and then self-care, it really opens their eyes to how serious this issue of mental health is and how critical self-care is for them. So usually after I'll teach a course, during the Q&A session afterwards, a lot of the participants will reach out and message stating, oh my God, I didn't realize it up until now, but I've been suffering from anxiety my entire life. And I didn't know until you spelled it out, what the signs and symptoms are, what the red flags are, how do you actually approach this and recognize this? I've had family members reach out stating that, you know, I didn't realize how serious the depression was for my friend until you mentioned how to confront someone about their suicidality and then have the conversation, an extremely difficult conversation, but a life-saving one. And they would open up by saying, you know, I'm still scared. This is a very scary thing to deal with, but I feel more confident at least knowing what to look out for and what to help someone with when they're in that moment. So for me, I would say the most impactful story that I have is having a brother reach out to me after our course, opening up about his own struggles with suicidal thoughts that, you know, he's been combating for years and felt so alone and isolated in his fight. And he didn't realize how common it actually is to struggle like this. And, you know, he asked me for help, and I was able to help connect him to a local provider on his campus and connected him with services. And alhamdulillah, that brother now, this is like a year afterwards, since the start of the pandemic, has made a remarkable turnaround for his self-care and his mental health, both at home and on campus. And alhamdulillah, he still struggles now. There's still a struggle that he fights with every so often, but he has so many more tools and resources now to help fight those suicidal thoughts and urges than he did before. And I'm honestly just really proud of him for fighting that fight. And inshallah, hopefully we can bring this, you know, toolkit to many others suffering similarly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shareef, for that, and a really poignant story as to why we're trying to focus on young people during this time and how suicide is so one of the main issues that we're facing and dealing with. Imam Khalid, thank you. I think we got a little bit frozen there, but we're going to come back to you. And hopefully, inshallah, you heard my point about we're sharing little stories here about how we've been impacted. So please.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Bismillah. So sorry, my network booted me off for a second. I apologize for that. Please forgive me. Yeah, you know, I think anecdotally, to illustrate within the course of however many of the last months, I could tell you story upon story of individual that has reached out that is dealing not only with coming to terms of wellness conditions they themselves have either become aware of or have known for some time in the context of a pandemic, but now in the prism of social isolation, trying to figure out how to manage that with family members, others who are not supportive and don't know how to be supportive. A young man, I'll give you an example, who was a student at our university, had very severe OCD. And of some of the things that would come into his routine, he would take showers for sometimes 6 hours at a time, would excessively make wudu, so much so that the skin color from his wrists down was a darker shade than from his hands because of how much he would excessively wash his hands over and over. And he was in a constant cycle of repeating prayers that he didn't know if he made this mistake or that mistake, and did I maintain my wudu, or did I make this slight mistake or that mistake. And when he came to a place now where it started to impact him in terms of his academics, his ability to get 100% on an exam and to get a 0 on the very next one, he started to now say, I need to engage with professionals to help. On my staff at the Islamic Center at New York University, we not only have a variety of religious scholars and administrators, but we have 2 clinical psychologists who are on staff to meet the psychotherapeutic needs of our Muslim student community. Our broader community base includes both students as well as non-students, and we serve about 10,000 people and have a bigger referral system for students, for non-students, because of liability concerns within the university apparatus. And so now when this student was in need of support, we were able to get them that. But the biggest challenge came when I had to sit down with their father. And the father was just unwilling to recognize where their child was. And we got to a point where we sat and spoke for at least 3.5 hours straight. And he said, there's nothing wrong with my son. My son does not need to be fixed. And I said, yes, you're right. There isn't anything wrong with your son. And the language that we are using is not one that indicates that he's broken in any way, but to understand that where he has a condition that necessitates professional attention, you can't be a roadblock in that way. And this past Ramadan, alhamdulillah, this young man went on a roller coaster over this experience with him. But as soon as his family got on board, he was able to get back on track with his academics, was able to now find part time work and go through various cognitive behavioral therapies that didn't necessitate for him medications, which was fine for him in specific. But he just really needed that support system around him to say that this is something that I know my family is here with me and they understand what it is that I'm going through, that it's not something that can be attributed to anything demonic, nor is it something that has to be swept under the rug and pretend like it's not there, but something that I can get to a place of recognition because I know the people around me are helping me with it. And in all of the prisms of anything that you could think of around wellness, it's a constant thing that continues to come up. But when there is that support system in place, it makes a huge difference as people are trying to now figure out how to move forward with some of it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, that's really very, I think, relevant to why we're here today. You know, with this kind of particular age group and the experience of anxiety, what that looks like for so many young people, what it ends up, you know, how they get affected in their daily lives, and then what does it look like in terms of mental health terms, you know, and understanding that. So I want to move next to, we're going to hear from Dilnaz Waraich, and we're so pleased to have her here. I'm really appreciative of everybody's time today. And I know, you know, everyone brings a different perspective. So Dilnaz, I really am just happy to have you here to kind of hear about how you've been taking in the mental health first aid movement yourself. Dilnaz has over 25 years of experience in education, community organizing, and interfaith engagement. She exemplifies generations of engaged and compassionate civil servants and is a huge advocate for mental health literacy and awareness. Thank you, Dilnaz.
Assalamualaikum. So happy to be here for this really important topic. But just hearing, you know, you and Brother Omar and Imam Khalid speak, I just feel like sometimes we don't exhale. So if we could just take a second to take a deep breath and then start with the rest of this conversation. So I'm just going to take a deep breath, and please join me if you'd like to. Thank you. I feel like sometimes life just makes us move so quickly that we don't pause to take deep breaths and really understand how the work that we do is so important and the connections that we have are so important. So the work that our family has been doing with AMHP, we really feel like American Muslim health professionals are on the key. They're doing pivotal work with understanding Muslim American communities. Understanding Muslim American communities in the college campus is so essential right now, as well as, through our diverse country right here. But one story that really resonates with me about the importance of mental health is how nuanced it is and how complex it is. So I have a very close friend, and she has a son who is diagnosed with schizophrenia at the age of 18. He's about 25 right now. And what I love about the relationship my friend and I have is like, she just tells me times where, he might have made this most amazing breakfast and they have a breakfast together with the family and it's so lovely. Or she'll talk about how he applied for a part-time job and he received the part-time job and he had a great interview. Or she'll tell me like they went shopping together and he bought this whole new wardrobe and he's so excited to complete his college courses. So I get these joys of her son and how wonderful and how happy his life is going. And then, a few weeks later, I'll just be like, how are things going? Or she'll just be like, it's really hard. It is so hard. He's not taking his medication. He's suicidal. It's so hard to have him at home. He hasn't been eating. It's hard for the rest of the family at home. And I think about like the juxtaposition of her life, right? Like there's times where there's these beautiful moments with her and her son and how impactful he is in his life. And then right away, there's times where there's really sadness and it's hard to have him live in a home with other siblings. So it's those nuanced stories that I think a lot of us don't hear. It's these complex stories of how wonderful and beautiful it is to have children and children with disabilities and children with mental health issues, and how important for us to focus on joys as well as challenges. Because most of us get to hear the challenges of mental health and how difficult it is, and there's no hope in sight. But there is hope in sight, and we need to focus on that hope. And we need to really, I appreciate what Imam Khalid said about the support system. So my friend and I, we walk like at least 4 times a week. And those walks are so important. And it's her self-care and it's my self-care, right? And caregivers need to have the support. Of course, the child and the person dealing with the mental health needs the support, but everyone in that home needs the support. The extended family needs the support. We need the language. We need the tools that you're talking about in the curriculum to do all this work. So I'm just going to say, each one of us has a superpower. I think about what our superpower is in this story. And I really think our superpower, Rukhsana, is about giving support. And that support can come from a text, it could come from a phone call, it could come from a meal, it can come from a dua. So how can we use our superpowers to uplift caregivers dealing with mental health issues and the individual actually dealing with mental health issues?
Thank you so much, Dilnaz. That's so true, really. And I think you're right. I think when you do all of this work and you're in the field of mental health, you do forget that, it sometimes, we do want to reinforce the part that gets less heard, this positive part, which is through community and connection, people's lives change, in terms of mental health and crises. And that, that's why we put our all behind this. It has, whether we it depend not, it really doesn't matter how many supporters. I think we'd still put all of our, efforts in mental health first aid or a movement towards this, knowing that you don't have to be in this field to really change, see the change in individuals and help them to move forward and kind of go about their lives in the way they want to. So I'm going to turn back now to the rest of our group, and we have Bushra here, who is really a critical element to the conversation, being on a college campus herself and just hearing stories from college-age students and being in direct experience with them. Bushra is a current senior at the University of Texas at Dallas, pursuing her undergraduate degree in computer science. Bushra Hameed, and she is the current president of our MSA, a member of Kappa Delta Nu, a Muslim interest sorority that focuses on uplifting young Muslim women in accordance with Islamic values, and is an active member of our local YM program. So thank you, Bushra. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share my experiences with my peers, along so many knowledgeable panelists. So just kind of, I'm in the setting of my college campus here today. It seemed pretty fitting. So since the start of the pandemic, mental health, I feel like, has been talked a lot about a little bit more commonly among students. Of course, not to the level that we would want to see, but it is now becoming a lot more of a common topic. And so for most students of all age ranges, elementary school all the way up to college, we're sharing a similar sentiment towards academics, where we're feeling stressed, anxious, burnt out, and some are even depressed. And school already is such a huge stress factor. Grades are stressful. I don't like being graded myself, honestly. But now that we're in a purely online experience, it creates a different level of mental and emotional stress. Before, if you had a question, you could visit your teacher, you could visit your professor's office hours, and even share some social interaction with them, ask them about their day. But now that professors, they're just purely responding to emails at this point, and sometimes they'll miss weeks and days because they'll even feel burnt out. So we don't even get that direct response from them. We're not able to communicate with them about how we're feeling about our grades, how we're feeling about our classes. And so a good example is just the other night, I was actually on the phone with one of my friends, and I was helping her draft an email to the dean because she had an online exam and her exam glitched. And her professor emailed her 6 days later and was saying, "I'm sorry, I can't do anything as it's a technical error." She's a pre-med student. Every grade matters when applying to medical school. So I'm sure you can imagine how stressed out and anxious she was feeling. And, now that we're in Ramadan as well, we are now trying to balance our spirituality with our academics. And so one of my classmates, he also called me one time and he was saying, "Hey, Bushra, I have to take Adderall." It was medically prescribed to him, but he was saying that it gives him a lot of headaches when he can't drink water all day because he's dehydrated. So what do you suggest that I do? And he mentioned that he wasn't even comfortable with asking his family members about it. He didn't want to talk to his family members about it because there would be this stigma. There'd be all these questions of, "Oh, why are you taking that? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that?" And that wasn't a conversation that he wasn't ready to have. And so he calls me and I tell him, like, my aunt is a child psychiatrist. I can ask her. And, from there we got to work. She contacted a nutritionist and, we were trying to figure out a meal plan for him and everything. And at one point he tried it out and was saying that, "I can't do this. I don't know if I can deal with all these headaches from, not being able to drink water. Can I skip my fast?" Now, I'm just, doing as much as I can. I don't have enough Islamic knowledge and background to be able to give like these fatwas or anything. And so I connected him with one of our MSA advisors who's very knowledgeable. And I connected with him and, he was able to give him advice on that. And so I think the biggest thing to take away is that, we have these resources. My campus itself, they advertise all these resources. We have our UTD counseling center. But at the same time, even myself, I don't feel comfortable attending these sessions because a lot of these UTD counselors, they'll have 3 to 5 sessions in person. And then from there, you're put into a group therapy session. And so when you go into these counseling sessions, you're already a little bit worried, like, what if I say something that might reflect badly on the religion? Because, we're just trying to get help. We're not trying to be an advocate for our entire religion at that point. But that's also something in the back of our minds. And so when we go into those counseling sessions, that's something that, students are already worried about. And then having to air out your dirty laundry to a whole group of other people at that point too, it's not an easy task. And so I think the biggest thing, and just a collective idea that, my friends, peers, everybody who's come to me when I let them know that I was going to be on this panel was that the biggest thing that we could most possibly do is educate our Islam or our spiritual leaders, whether it's at a mosque, at a church, at a Jewish center, any agnostic, doesn't matter, whatever religious background, whatever ideology you have, educate these leaders in our community and bring in counselors, therapists, whoever, and let them know what the cultural and spiritual backlash might even be in some cases, and let them know how the community responds to these type of things. Just having those sort of conversations. And I think the biggest thing that's really important is just maintaining that level of conversations, because we have these resources, yes, but if they're not the most helpful resources, students will not be able to use it, and we won't be able to benefit from it. And alhamdulillah, we do have a lot more Muslims coming into the field. We do have a lot more people coming in, but at the same time, there's also that factor of expenses. When students aren't able to open up to their parents about it and let them know, hey, I need help, and I'm not able to pay for these resources, these adequate resources that I know can help me, that's something to take into account too. So even connecting that sense of creating that balance essentially between that spirituality versus that everyday life that we feel, I think that would be an important factor to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Bushra, for that. I think that at this point, I'd like to kind of go with where you went, which is really hearing about this direct experience on college campuses and kind of get an understanding from both you and Imam Khalid on, what both of you think the most critical aspect of mental health is for young people right now in this age group, in terms of, reflecting on what you both have shared in your stories. What do you think is most important for them right now and to get addressed? Neither of you can share. Imam Khalid, I'll go with you. Go to you first.
I was going to say, Bushra, you can go ahead first.
Oh, okay.
You're kind of continuing. Sorry about that.
I think the biggest thing is just having an open line of communication. Because, for example, my friend who, had a question about whether he could fast or not. Having those sort of open lines of communications with even our religious centers, people who we feel closest to, just letting them know the importance of just being open about this sort of topic, I think would be the most important factor. Because you meet people all the time on college campuses, you get to form a lot of connections, so you'll have that social interaction, but just creating that understanding that this is something that we can carry on into everyday conversations helps to normalize this topic as well.
Thank you.
We get contacted by students from various college campuses all around the country. And in New York, our Islamic Center, we have a large Muslim student community at NYU. There's about 3,000 students, but also many Muslim students from other campuses will reach out because there's not adequate resources on their campuses. And I think, one, that's a huge gap and a need that needs to be addressed. I think on the pastoral end, definitely the form of chaplaincies and campus ministries, but within the specifics of wellness and mental health wellness, to have culturally competent individuals that can understand and address the diverse needs of this community that's not homogenous in any way, right? If you look at an MSA, for example, this is a generalization, many MSAs tend to be quite ethnocentric. They are not spaces that cater to both Sunni and Shia Muslims. In some spaces, it's hard to be female as a Muslim and to be in a space. You have a predominance of South Asians or Arabs, but quite often converts and African Americans don't have access to it. That in and of itself now creates a challenge of an absence of communal support. And then when you're going to a wellness center, that necessitates you going through a process that you might not have ever done before as you're engaging a therapist for the first time or a counselor, and the person sitting across the other end doesn't really know how to deal with both the religious nuance as well as the cultural nuance that you bring to the table. When I do trainings for wellness counselors across our global sites at New York University to give them an insight on, well, this is how you have to understand that Muslims are not archetypal in any way. And some of the questions that come up around, how they see race, for example, as a symbol of religiosity, how they see whether someone is dressed a certain way or not as a symbol of their religiosity and their practice, or where they might utilize religion as a scapegoat of saying, well, this is the cause of some of your issues. That student now is going to have that much more internal kind of agitation and conflict. They don't have a space to go to their localized student organization. The local masjid is not a space to have these conversations. And the therapists that are on site, they also just don't understand. And then the last piece that I would say here that really does impact college students that are now more in like a commuter college demographic is that they do have a direct link to their local masjid. And there's no shortage of individual who is amazing in what they're trained to do to now offer advices on things that they're not trained to do, and to utilize terminologies incorrectly and to apply them now in circumstances that further problematize the circumstance for the young person who's trying to just figure out what to do. And so a local masjid that has an imam or a sheikh or a scholar could potentially also have training in some field of mental health, but they might not, and quite often they don't. And in these commuter college campuses, the conversations that bleed into now their experience, because they didn't go away for college, and it's as if they're still within their local mosque environment, and that conversation has either never started on mental health, or the people who are providing counseling, they're just not trained to do it. And it just creates still a lot of unhealthiness and unhappiness inwardly and outwardly that bleeds in. And so I think that training is very key at every level, whether that's having culturally competent staff that are getting trained on what Muslim experience is, whether they're Muslim or not, and they're counselors in the university health centers. There are trained people on staff, professional, to meet directly the needs of Muslim college students. And then local communities also get a training that helps them to understand what it is that they are and what it is that they're not, so that they can bring people on staff to help navigate some of it more thoroughly.
Thank you so much. It's very insightful from both Bushra and Imam Khalid. That's really the only, it seems really important to hear from both of you because of the fact that you guys are in these positions where you get that direct experience to understand this type of struggle, like the commuter campus, and the fact that the open communication experience of young people, both of you really touching on that I keep hearing that idea of space to have these types of struggles, and then the actual space you're coming from, impacting how you view mental health, whether you're, able to have that struggle and be able to talk about it. I'm going to shift to Dilnaz and hear a little bit from you because I'm going to I'm going to introduce a video on MHFA, but I'd like to hear from Dilnaz on your kind of experience of how you see the community when we shift outside of college campus. What do you think, and how do you see the community's awareness of young people's mental health and well-being right now? And I mean the American Muslim community, in your perspective, awareness of the issues and struggles.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot about how a lot of times we're told, even when we're younger or in our home or in our massages, we hear like, oh, Muslims don't get depressed because we just need to pray and we can pray away the depression. Or you hear about like how this is really, actually, this is a contradiction towards the way the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the teachings that he did, the actions that he did. And what we're doing is we're really ignoring the environmental and the biological effects of what causes depression, what causes mental illness in certain individuals. And it's so important for us to have that holistic view. So I think about the training that I was very fortunate to attend. So I went to this training, and in the training, what I was able to get was I was able to really absorb a lot of empathy and language that I was missing. And the training was actually at the Catholic Theological Union right here in Chicago. And what I really appreciate about the training is, number one, it made me proximate to the problem. I felt like, I was listening and learning a little bit about mental health, but it made me proximate to really getting in a room of mental health professionals and getting that information in front of me. The second thing it made me do was it made me comfortable being uncomfortable. So there were personal stories. We shared stories at our table, but like, you really have to disclose your personal wellness, your personal struggles. And honestly, I had a lot of personal struggles in my own upbringing, and especially, as a woman, trying to find herself. I remember when I had my 45th birthday, people say like, oh, you're going through all these crazy ideas. I'm like, no, I'm actually not. I'm just trying to discover myself. I'm trying to make sure that I'm owning my voice. So when people talk about like, oh, why are you so this or that? It's us understanding our narrative, understanding how we want to drive this conversation forward. So it was a very informative training, and I'm so glad I went. I went to one training and I felt like that was the first tool in my toolbox. Now it's like this journey, right? Like, how do we get more trainings? How do we get more information on mental health? How do we make sure we take our brothers and sisters and our parents and aunts and uncles to these mental health conferences, and we just don't do it ourselves, but it's a cultural change. I also think about how, Imam Khalid, you were introduced as a religious pluralist, and you're really interested in doing this work to create a better America. And that's what that training was. It was an interfaith gathering. It was a gathering to create a better America. And when we have these interfaith gatherings and we talk about our identities, my Muslim identity or Jewish or Christian identity at that table, we bring that religiousness, the spirituality at the table, and we talk about how important that is. And I don't need to hide my identity and how important my identity is to my mental health as well. So I think all of those areas were very important to the training that I went to. And I was fortunate to be at one training, and I'm excited to attend another training, because I feel like every year I need to like up my game in understanding mental health and mental awareness.
Thank you so much, Dilnaz. And I am glad to hear about the MHFA training that you attended personally. And, I think like a testimonial like that is the only way to really understand what you get out of that. I mean, when you're really an attendee yourself, I've done it myself, and I've done years of training in the field of mental health. And then I took the training of MHFA a few times, and I'm always surprised about the amount of information they can offer, but that is so accessible. It is so, and that's my experience as someone who works in that area. So I really appreciate that. And I want to now introduce a little more about MHFA, and then we're going to hear from Dr. Omar Shareef about his work teaching this and how he's taken in the feedback of people that have taken the training. So I will introduce that now. I want to make sure people know to visit our website, amhp.us, to learn more about MHFA training, sign up for a training, and donate. And thanking our sponsors again, Helping Hand, Amana, and Saturna, and Nexus Pharmaceuticals, and Devon Bank. So I'd like to have that video play now. This will be a short video, followed by another video by one of our sponsors, Helping Hand USA.
Insight and
56% of American adults with a mental illness do not receive treatment. So that's why it was really important for American Muslim health professionals to provide these mental health first aid certification trainings so that individuals can become more informed about risk factors and warning signs of mental health issues.
Mental illness does not discriminate. Age is not a barrier, religion is not a barrier, race is not a barrier, gender is not a barrier, because mental health challenges affects all people. It's important for us to have interfaith communities coming together and discussing mental health issues, because this kind of issues sort of connects the communities when we have all people from all backgrounds working on common issues together.
In Surah Ad-Duha, there's a verse in the Quran that says, "Wake up, See the sunlight. It's not all bad.
Help us to identify mental illness as the disease it is, that we might have courage and wisdom in the face of ignorance and stigma.
I really enjoyed and learned a lot, and I'm happy that I can give it back to the people I work with.
It leaves you with something like tangible that you could actually implement. This prepares you because it leaves you with actual things to say to them.
I'm learning techniques in terms of how to minister to people. I may be talking to a Muslim, I may be talking to someone who is Catholic, I'm a Protestant myself, so I need to be available for whoever they are, whenever they're in need.
The training is very excellent, very well informed, with a lot of prompts and group activities which give a great insight and different views of mental health.
What I really love is the diversity. We're all one. My son got sick with bipolar disorder. That's why I'm here.
We are currently organizing similar trainings in 7 cities, and we're hoping to expand and provide this in a lot of other communities across the country.
Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My brothers and sisters, this is Helping Hand for Relief and Development. Alhamdulillah, last year, through your giving and your contribution, you were able to touch 11 million people's lives. That is a powerful impact. Your donation and contribution helped and impact the life of so many people through Water for Life programs, through shelter, and through healthcare by providing eye surgeries in so many different parts of the world. Alhamdulillah, we are in the best time of the year, the last 10 nights of Ramadan. These nights are special to such an extent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, خَيْرٌ مِّنْ أَلْفِ شَهْرٍ, that a night that you stand in worship for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is better than 1,000 months in worship. So how do we earn the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during this month? Especially on the night of power. Give in charity, as the Prophet ﷺ was generous in giving in the blessed month of Ramadan, as the Prophet ﷺ was the most generous, but he would be the most generous in the month of Ramadan. This year, we're asking you, inshallah ta'ala, to support some of our work and some of our relief programs that we are doing. You can automate your donation, automate your sadaqah, and automate your zakah. Every night, give a little portion of what you intend to give throughout Ramadan and earn the greatest of reward on the night of power, inshaAllah ta'ala. I want to say a special thank you to all of you for helping us do this great work. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you again to Helping Hand USA. That was really beautiful. And I'm really glad that we got to share a little bit about what MHFA looks like from the inside in the other videos. So I'm going to now turn to Dr. Shareef. And Dr. Shareef has an extensive experience teaching this. So I'm going to jump in just to kind of have you explain a little bit more about what this looks like. I think one thing that gets confusing about MHFA is, you know, how is this kind of like a mental health program when you're not directly, you know, giving a clinical care? And this is to kind of deconstruct it a little bit, if you could do that for us.
Sure, absolutely. So the best way I can conceptualize mental health first aid is sort of thinking of it as like psychological CPR. And whenever you take a CPR course, you're not expected to be a clinician. You're not expected to have a medical degree. You're not expected to be a paramedic. You're not expected to drive the ambulance, go to the scene of where someone is in, clinical distress or has a severe injury, and then provide medical care. That's not expected at all. The expectation you have from CPR training is to simply provide support in a critical moment until professional help arrives, or until you're able to get someone to professional help. Mental health first aid works in that same capacity, where we provide training for someone to assist in a critical moment for identifying signs, symptoms, red flags that they themselves or friends or family members or even just random strangers may be exhibiting, and then teaching them the tools and techniques to intervene in that moment, to help in that crisis moment. And then from that crisis moment, connect them to professional help. So CPR uses a basic acronym, ABC, airway, breathing, circulation. And that's sort of the gist of what someone trained in CPR would use to help assess someone in that moment. What mental health first aid uses is the acronym called ALGE, which is assessing for risk of suicide or harm, listening non-judgmentally, giving help and reassurance, encouraging self-help, and then the last part, which is encouraging professional help and support. So we use this acronym throughout the course itself and show the different iterations of how it can be used to help someone who may be suffering from a crisis of suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideation, or perhaps is on the cusp of a suicide attempt. How do you connect with someone in this moment? How do you bridge the conversation? How do you recognize signs and symptoms? And then how do you get them to a professional or get them to a hospital, depending on the severity of what you're dealing with? You can also use the ALGE method to help someone suffering from an anxiety attack or a panic attack, someone who may be suffering from an addiction or an overdose of substance use. You can also use the ALGE technique to assist someone who may be in the midst of a psychotic break or a psychotic episode. And you can also use the ALGE method to simply intervene in less severe cases. Someone who may be just suffering in general and doesn't know how to have a conversation or has never had anyone actually ask them about their more intimate emotional or psychological distress. So it's an excellent tool and resource that we train in the course, and we use examples. There's like cases that we use to help you practice the technique and then master it by the end of it. The course itself is about 8 hours long, but it's a lot to expect people to sit on Zoom for 8 hours. All of us are already experiencing Zoom fatigue. So the way the course is structured is 2 to 3 hours are spent on your own asynchronously. You do your own pre-course work, and then 6 hours of the course is spent online with an instructor giving you live training for the course. And at the end of a course, you receive a certificate certifying you in mental health first aid. And again, just I want to clarify, Rukhsana made this point. The expectation is that we don't want you to become a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. That's not the expectation at all. This is just like CPR. The only expectation we have is for you to help recognize signs and symptoms in yourself and others who may be suffering, connect with them in that moment, and then get them to professional help. That's pretty much the gist of mental health first aid.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shareef. I'm going to ask just a follow-up here, and then I'm going to kind of go to the rest of the panelists and talking about things that we've seen in our community recently and get a sense of that. I want to ask you, how have you seen MHFA, what impact have you seen in the community in all this time you've been working and doing this? I mean, have you seen any significant impact or any, impact that people have told you about personally?
Yes. Oh, for sure. Absolutely. When we bring this training to college MSAs in particular, we see a huge response from the students who engage, understanding that they now have the power and control and knowledge to recognize what they may be suffering from, or what their friends may be suffering from, or even their family members at home. And we sort of equip them with the tools and resources they can use to help guide themselves, their friends, and their family members towards seeking that help. It literally breaks the ice and opens a conversation to have. And it's a really important conversation to have. Bushra and Imam Khalid touched upon this, which is that this is so essential for breaking silence around this issue. And that's the problem that we see when it comes to community members, MSA members, and our ummah in general, is that so many people suffer in silence and they suffer in isolation, and they don't realize how common these problems are and how available the tools and resources are to get help. Oftentimes you have to fight against social stigma, you have to fight against cultural barriers, maybe even religious barriers. You have to fight against a lot of different elements to try and connect them to care that is culturally tailored, faith-based, and trauma-informed. And that's something that I try my best to emphasize in mental health first aid. The second big impact that I have found from teaching the course is in Muslim communities in particular, Muslim communities. When you bring this course and the people sitting there in your audience are imams, masjid boards, and community members, what you find is that a lot of masjid communities, a lot of Muslim communities, unfortunately, do not have access to a psychiatrist. They don't have access to psychotherapists. They don't have access to mental health professionals. But what you can do is, instead of forcing a mental health professional to sit in that community, you can train hundreds of community members in mental health first aid so that they're able to help support one another and at least destigmatize the conversation, normalize that conversation. And so what I love the most is, after mental health first aid, usually we connect with the imam, and the next khutbah that month is a mental health topic for that khutbah, where they discuss anxiety, or they discuss suicidality, or they discuss mental health in general, and the Islamic approach to it. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created all of these conditions that we are tried with, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a treatment for every single one of them except one, and that's death. But that being said, there is treatment available, and seeking that treatment and help is not antithetical to your faith whatsoever at all. It's actually pursuant towards that. So having a masjid community equipped with this training, having the imam, the staff, the board, community leaders equipped with this knowledge helps. It really genuinely helps from a top-down approach to help community members see the necessity of having programming, resources, and staff available to offer this kind of service to community members who may be suffering. So I would say AMHP has done a fantastic job with, branching out, and today's focus is more on youth and MSAs. And just like Bushra has highlighted, this is a critical community in need of mental health support and help. A lot of the news that we are receiving is heartbreaking, because the ones suffering and making the news for their suffering are our Muslim youth, are folks that are my age and Bushra's age that suffer from this. And often the result of this suffering leads to something fatal, often not just for themselves, but it causes ripple effects throughout the entire community, where we all collectively feel that emotional pain and heartbreak as a result of it.
Thank you, Dr. Shareef. And I think, if we would be, not looking at where we are today, as we kind of like have about 5 or 6 minutes here, without addressing and seeing, the reality of what our community has faced in the last, I'd say, I suppose, 3 to 4 weeks. So we know, I wanted to give a chance to each of the speakers to kind of hear their thoughts on what can be learned in terms of the community ripple effect. And I'm speaking about the tragedies we saw in Allen, Texas. We know that there was a murder-suicide of 6 family members, and then we also know there was another tragedy of a homicide of at least 2 family members, and they were both in American Muslim families. And exactly that we feel the impact, wherever you are, really just knowing that mental health was a portion of it. And the fact is, we don't know every detail of it, but I know that the people that were living in that community did feel that effect significantly. So I was wondering if the speakers could kind of talk about anything they had thoughts on in terms of what do we learn about tragedies, like from in the community, about mental health, and how to improve our understanding of it. What do you guys take away from that? How do you actually think of what we can learn from these horrible, tragedies in our community? And I'll give a chance to each speaker. Bushra, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. So what happened in Allen, this is kind of a heavy topic, but what happened in Allen I have a lot of friends who have known that family or both families and have been involved in that community for so long. And even though I haven't known them personally, there still is such a ripple effect that it has on the community. That's something that a lot of, you know, kids my age don't see every day. That's not something that, you know, we've ever thought we'd see so close to home. That's usually something that we just heard about in the news, some far distant place. But seeing that it's so close to us, it just made it very apparent that, you know, at the end of the day, we're really just kids. We're just trying to be there for one another as much as we can. But at the same time, we also have our own limits as well. So that's where we kind of turn towards our community leaders. And I really like what Dr. Omar Shareef was saying about how, you know, we need to kind of bridge that gap between professionals and our community leaders, because they do work hand in hand. Yes, they may not be the most qualified people to give the advice. That's perfectly fine. Just creating that simple connection to somebody who can help, who can be there in these type of situations, really does help the rest of the community as well. So we have avenues to turn to.
Thank you, Bushra. Any reflections on what can be learned? And I don't want to even put it in the terms of learning from the tragedy itself. It's learning about our community. What have we learned about it? What have we seen in terms of the impact on the community and rippling that you could reflect on? Dilnaz and Imam Khalid. I'll go to Dilnaz first.
Sure. Again, yeah, this is a really heavy topic, but I think about resiliency and how, alhamdulillah, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us resiliency, and how do we use this resiliency to forge forward, but not put things underneath the rug we talked about. But I also think about the effects of COVID. I feel like we've just touched on it, and it's going to keep lingering and lingering. And I've got two sons, one that's a 20-year-old and one that's 23, and how it's affected their social life, their work life, their ability to be able to just be normal kids and go out and hang out. And for an entire almost 18 months, everything that's been happening with the racial unrest, with the economic issues, with the health issues, we're really being tested. And inshallah, you know, we're going to get out of this test and we're going to be a stronger community, but it really relies on us. What ownership are we taking? So I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. Like, we each have a superpower. Our superpower is be able to support each other. It's the fact that we could text each other, call each other, drop a meal off, smile when we don't have our masks on, or even smile with our mask on. But those are such simple tools, but how do we use those tools to uplift others as well as uplift ourselves? So look at what little dent we can make in the world and what little control we have in the world, and how we can make that to make it better for all of our communities.
Thank you, Dilnaz. I appreciate that. And I very much agree. And I'm wondering, let's hear from Imam Khalid, and then we can kind of reflect on where we are at the end.
Yeah. So, you know, the young girl who was unfortunately killed in that tragic attack was a student of mine at NYU. Her name is Farbeen Tawheed. May Allah grant her and her family peace. And so, you know, in the aftermath, there was a lot of conversations people were trying to pull me into, from media to Muslims. You know, my immediate concern was both her family, who she has relatives in New York City that are members of our Islamic Center at NYU, not students, but her uncle and her grandmother, who also died tragically in the incident. Her grandmother's brother was here as well, and then her classmates and friends. And I think this was something that was a red flag to me in terms of what I was seeing in social media. Everybody felt as if they were empowered to comment on something. I didn't see a lot of compassion towards those who lost loved ones being expressed in social media posts, etc. I saw thousands of people commenting on mental health who have no idea what they're talking about. And, you know, it was highly reactive. And I can see in my own students who are friends of Farbeen's that they were struggling in just trying to understand now how to move forward. We did a prayer service, had Quran read for the deceased that was open, and then we did a smaller healing space that was a little bit more intimate. And literally, the first student to speak in that healing space said, "This is the third person that I know who I've lost to suicide as a classmate." And then she caught herself and she said, "Actually, the first two were suicide. I guess this is the first person I know that has passed from homicidal violence." And this girl's 18 years old. And so, the challenge comes, I think, manifold. There's an absence of just self care strategies that we can only give to people what we possess in the first place. And I feel like a generalization I'm comfortable making is that so many humans, Muslims included, become very directly solution oriented and don't know how to be empathetic to somebody in a time of pain when they need healing, how to help them grieve and to let them grieve in their own unique way. Sometimes people want their space and they don't want people in their face. And sometimes people need only certain types of people around them. But the ability to suspend the ego and everything that feeds and fuels it, and to understand the lived experience of the other through what they're going through, that to me was not there. There was an absence of empathy. And it now creates a lot of challenges statistically. You all know better than I do the realities of suicidal contagion and what's possible when we're pushing forward things that should not necessarily be promoted on such a level of virality on social media. But it fundamentally also forgets that there's people who are friends with this family. There's people who are related to this family. There's people who, on a very human level, just need real empathy and real love to help them grieve in not only the passing of their loved ones, but in this heinous way of losing somebody. And that was just something that seemed to be missing quite glaringly. And is it a space to have a conversation? Yeah, it is, but I think in a timely fashion. And it doesn't have to be in the onset. I think first there has to be an honoring of the fact that life was lost, and to understand what is the immediate concern of those who were directly impacted, and to then be able to navigate in ways that make sense. And this will be the last thing that I say. This is why there's a need for interdisciplinary modes of engagement and leadership. It's amazing that you all have this organization, and it needs to exist. And it's also amazing that there's so many people that are doing so much work in their respective fields. A next step of institutional maturation is to now have cross-discipline understandings to come up with processes and systems that say, what do we deal with in the aftermath of this? After this tragedy took place, there were at least 4 different individuals who contacted me immediately the next day saying, "This reminds me of my friend who I lost to suicide. This reminds me of my fiance who I lost to suicide. And that was just in the next day, let alone in the weeks that have come after." And again, they're looking for healing, they're looking for support. They don't know necessarily where to go. I think people are aware of the conversation, they just don't know what to do. And getting the right people with the right skill set and training at the table with other decision makers to ensure that the systems that get put in place now to deal, God forbid, with something that happens next doesn't take this incident in vain. And we honor those who we lost by saying we're going to build what we need to better with credentialed individuals so that we can respond more effectively in a worst case situation that comes up down the line.
Thank you, Mama Khalid. That's hugely insightful. I actually didn't think of that institutional level yet, and I think that's something to consider. And I think Dilnaz and Bushra both said this is a heavy topic, and I recognize that as a psychologist. This is kind of like what I understand deeply, but I also believe in the way I work is that sometimes naming what is unnameable sometimes is the part that we need to kind of get to, like the next level, the next step, because it feels like we've already done that, dance for so long. And I think that's part of why we put so much effort into mental health in general. We need to kind of figure out what is the next step, and how are we going to move it forward? So I pray for both families, and I know that everybody here is. I know that all of AMP's membership has expressed that, and I think it only propels us to do what we can in whatever capacities we have. And I think that's so important as we hold, mikduas for their families and the people that have suffered in those situations. I want to give a last kind of 30-second time to each speaker to kind of reflect on the final piece of this is really, and so connected to where we are, I think. And that's, why is it so important right now in your reflection and closing remarks to address young people's mental health literacy? How to kind of, why is this so critical in your eyes? And I'll go from the beginning, I'll go from Bushra to, I'll go to Bushra, Omar, Dilnaz, and Khalid.
I think this topic is very critical because, we always talk about the importance of youth and how we're the building blocks for the future. So investing in something like this, investing into the people who will continue to build on and work on what, we've started, investing into the future. I think that's the most important factor. Investing into our people on a more emotional level, exactly like Imam Khalid was saying. Have that human level, have that understanding how to connect with people, even understanding your own boundaries as well. Where can I help versus where can somebody else help as well? I think this type of conversation would really be beneficial.
Thank you, Bushra. Dr. Shareef.
Everybody made incredible points today. So much I can add to it. I think, our solution moving forward, as Imam Khalid had mentioned, is to create a deeper, more structural approach moving forward, where this isn't something that's just reactionary, where every single time we have this conversation, it has to be after a tragedy in order for us to have this conversation. How many tragedies does it really take until enough conversation is had for something to take root in order for this to be preventative? So any clinician will tell you that the best treatment is that which is preventative. And the best way to prevent tragedies like this from happening is to empower people with a level of knowledge, a literacy and understanding of not only mental health in general, but their own wellness and what it takes for them to promote their own wellness, and then encouraging that wellness in their friends, in their family, and equipping everyone in a community with at least a baseline understanding of what are the fundamental aspects of mental health and mental wellness. So at the very least, we have a community level approach to this, where we're not led by emotional reactions, we're not led by ignorance, we're not led by a lack of understanding, and ultimately we're not led by a lack of empathy when it comes to recognizing and supporting and guiding those who are suffering towards help, towards recovery, towards a future that is better for them and better for those around them. So that's the hope that I have ultimately, that what has happened in Texas, and unfortunately what has just happened yesterday in Kansas City, doesn't happen again to our community. We have to stop the hemorrhaging of the, all the blood and pain that we're experiencing. And it starts here with us. It starts with educating yourself. So this is my hope for AMHP's Mental Health First Aid initiative, which is, if you don't know about mental health, if you don't understand and grasp what these concepts are, or what different types of emotional, psychological pain and suffering people can go through, educate yourself. And this is the way to do it. Encourage this course to come to your Muslim community, to your MSA, to your community center, and start the conversation, with this knowledge and power in hand. So that being said, Jazakallah khair, thank you guys for inviting me tonight to be a part of this.
I think about how a lot of times you hear this phrase, our youth are our future, and that's so not correct because our youth are our present day leaders, and we need to invest in our present day leaders, and we need to invest strategically. So when AMHP can come to your city and do these trainings, we need to invest in that. And our family is invested in like the next 3 years, right? So our family has said, we really appreciate these trainings. And how do we get these trainings in Chicago for the next 3 years? You do that by funding it. So you make sure that you and your family and your friends and your neighbors, it doesn't matter if it's $10, but as long as we do something strategically 3 years in a row, it builds a budget for this organization, AMHP, that's doing this impactful work. It creates systems and policies. That's what we need. We need systems and policies in place. So what we can do is go from city to city and from masajid to masajid to create these amazing trainings. So if you have the ability to give $10 3 years in a row, please do that. If you have the ability to give a lot more, please do that as well. But make sure that you're committing to something 3 years in a row. AMHP can commit to that for their budget. You can, inshallah, with your intentions, commit to it for 3 years as well and get the sawab. We're in the last 10 days, right? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows if we're going to actually be able to fulfill it next year. But if you make that intention, inshallah, it'll happen.
Imam Khalid, you can close us out. I know we're a little over. I really appreciate everyone's time, and we'll just close after your comments.
I mean, I would just say a couple of quick things. One, if you know somebody is going through something and you don't know what to do with them, reach out to AMHP. I've reached out on a lot of occasions to find referrals for professionals in various parts of the United States, and not to speak on the organization's behalf, but I've never come up short in finding a resource for somebody in a part of the country that I don't have contacts with. And if you don't have somebody that you know of, you can reach out. They have a full network of amazing individuals. I think if you yourself feel like you're struggling with anything, reach out to resources that make sense for you as well, and to ensure that you don't have to go through anything on your own. And we're here for you in whatever way that we can be. And I would say that if you can take this training and you can also bring it back to communities you're a part of, organizations you're a part of. When we've done mental health first aid trainings at our Islamic center, we've had rooms that have been filled to the capacity because people know that they have loved ones in their lives, or they themselves, that are struggling with their own wellness, and they want to know now what to do beyond meeting them with just platitudes. Everything cannot just be claimed to be a test from God. Everything cannot also just be claimed to put more trust in God or have faith in God. If you want to talk to yourself in a self-talk and platitudinal levels, that's fine. But when you're engaging now a real person who has complexity to them, it's hard right now for a lot of people, right? Just like Bushra started out when she said, you go into spaces and you can't even represent yourself. You have to now adopt this double consciousness because you see yourself constantly through a prism that society has imposed upon you. Every Muslim suddenly represents all Muslims and all of Islam. And no, you just represent your name. You can just be yourself, and you don't have to carry this burden on your shoulders of somehow representing all of the rest of us. There's some of us who can fill those roles, and we'll try to do it better. But it's okay for you to take time just for you, and it's okay for the people around you to also just take some time and space for themselves. So please support the organization. Bring the training to your spaces, especially as COVID starts to end, inshallah, and we can start to come together. But also just ensure that you're taking care of yourself and you're letting the people around you take care of them, and you're going to the best resources possible. And if you don't know what that is, I know that my co-panelists are comfortable with me saying it on their behalf as well. Reach out to any one of us and we'll do our best to connect you to who it is that makes the most sense to help you get the assistance and support that you need.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone's time. I know that we went a little bit over, but when you do address an issue like this and you're thinking about what you can do with this if you decide to take this training or donate, You know, it is true that there's so many places you can take this. You take it to your family, or even the conversation we had today. You know, you take it to your friend groups, or you take it to a campus group, or you take it back to your, you know, where you're living and whoever is around you at that time. The point is the conversations also ripple. So I think I want to just thank everybody. I would love to thank our sponsors again, because that's such a critical part of how we get these webinars done and have these conversations. And of course, our esteemed panelists, Dr. Shareef, Bushra Hameed, Dilnaz Waraich, Khalid Latif. I really appreciate your time. Again, absolutely, I think we would all say we're here to be contacted for any other questions after our webinar. So thank you, and thanks again for your extra time. Signing off.